welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I am Representative Gary Hart. I like saying that.
You like saying that?
I like saying that. It makes me feel important.
What if you don't get reelected?
The Honorable. I can go to the Honorable Gary because you stay honorable.
Oh, you stay honorable?
Like, you know Dan Itza. Dan Itza is honorable.
So you're the Honorable Gary. What am I? Am I not honorable simply because I never served?
Exactly.
Okay.
Nothing personal. So this is Josh, my accomplice, Solomon.
That's me.
Were you named after the Solomon?
I don't know. I was named after my family name, Solomon.
So where'd that come from?
Oh, I have no idea. I've done my genealogy. It goes back. I'm Irish.
You're a mutt.
But
You're a mutt,
my great grandfather was a pastor, as was his father. So
wow,
I have some religious roots.
I actually think. Well, anyway, our guest today is Ken Bosse. You're a pastor at what church?
New Life Church in Raymond.
New Life Church in Raymond. I have a lot of friends that go and listen to you every Sunday. You're a well-respected guy. So, to his point about his grandfather, it's set the Bible. This is completely off topic, but that's where I usually do things. So the Bible says the sins of the father will be visited up to the second and third generation, but the descendants of a righteous man will be blessed for 10 generations.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
So
I'm good.
No, yeah, well, you because I have a great uncle who was a pastor, and my understanding is my great grandmother was super. Almost puritanically religious, so I wonder if that was part of the blessings that passed down from that generation down to me that kept me, because I really, when I was a teenager, really wanted to get in trouble, but it always stayed just out of enough trouble. I was just on that threshold of. I'm not going to admit to anything on the air. But
I was just under the threshold of actually getting into trouble.
Really?
Yeah.
What a loser. So
yeah, I've never worn any handcuffs except in bed. So
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I stopped drinking. It's going to be in next month, just to exactly 1 month from now, it'll be 39 years since I drank.
Good for you.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Because I break out in handcuffs when I do.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, I asked you to go out for a drink, and you said, no, I'm allergic to alcohol. I break out in handcuffs. And I had to think about it for a second.
Yeah.
I remember that.
It has that effect. Effect.
So anyway, Sir Ken, there is so much discourse in the nation right now. We have some people are believe that regardless of what happens November 3rd next month, there will be violence to one extent or another breaking out because one group or the other will not be happy, or there will be orchestrated violence to try to stir up groupthink and stuff like that. So it's. I wanted to talk about spiritually. What does the Bible say about, I mean, it doesn't say specifically about the year 2020, but it does say some of the things that are, the spirit of what's going on can't be new.
Right, yeah, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun, so, nations have come and nations have gone, and when you study that chart on the different phases of nations, they start off with poverty or slavery, they move to courage to faith to liberation to prosperity to apathy to dependence, and then dependence back into slavery. And so you see that cycle in all the nations that have arisen and then collapsed, and we're basically on that dependency stage right now, where we've got a millennial generation, the entitlement generation, that is flaunting the ideas of socialism and thinking that even though it's been tried over 100 times in the last 100 years, that we can do it the right way this time.
Oh, good. That'll be unique.
Yeah, and you know what they say.
Socialism. We say socialism doesn't work, and they're always saying, well, it's never been done correctly. And my response is, It's been done correctly multiple times.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
You're just not listening.
Right, right. Yeah. So if you want, I just kind of put some thoughts together.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do
We
was
usually
kind of
don't allow that on the show.
no thinking.
but,
All right.
yeah.
I just wanted to start on a platform of where we come from as a nation, because if we don't know where we come from, we don't know who we are, and if we don't know who we are, we don't know who or what we can become.
Correct.
And we're going to always gravitate towards becoming less than what we should become.
Yeah.
So and then I want to talk about a couple of things that I believe shifted us as a nation, and then where we are today, and why we are in the mess we are today.
All right.
So going right back to the very beginning of our nation, 1620, the Pilgrims come over. The Mayflower Compact was signed in 1620, and the Mayflower Compact basically says this: a new colony to be established, quote, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, unquote.
Right.
So when you look at the genesis of the foundations of America, it's definitely a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We have a lot of modern-day politically correct history that's trying to retool all this out of the narrative to say,
Right.
you know, today it was a secular society from the beginning, which just isn't true. And then you move on to, and of course, you know, look at New England, where, you know, obviously was the first settlements, the 13 colonies, and in every town there's a church building. And the church was the center of social life. It was where voting took place. It was where political debates took place. It was the hub, and so the church was a part of the fabric.
Something to bring that home. If you look at churches, they were never taxed. It's because the townspeople themselves built it.
Right. Yeah. As a matter
So
of fact,
why would you collectively, tax something that you all built together? That just
Right.
doesn't make.
Yeah. In fact, the Congregational Church in the town I resided in, Raymond, was actually built by taxpayers' money. So back then, they saw the importance of the local church being the hub of society.
Yeah.
And then you get to the Declaration of Independence, which, of course, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So again, our founding fathers were framing this concept of faith in God, and that God is sovereign and that God oversees the affairs on earth, of nations all the way down to the individual person.
Right.
And so that was, again and again. Ben Franklin, 1787, he says, I have lived, sir, a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it possible that an empire can rise without his aid? And so, again, then he says, you know, we see in the sacred writings that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. So, you know, I think Ben Franklin is now talking about the uniqueness and the greatness of this fledgling nation that's coming out of, you know, basically servitude, and gaining its independence, gaining its wings, and destined for greatness. John Adams, the general principles on which the founding fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. So again and again and again, George Washington, it's impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible. Patrick Henry, this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So right in the fabric of everything. And so when these people come along with, you know, politically correct history and try to retool things, that's steering the ship away from the foundation of who we are as a people.
So to back up what you said, in the New Hampshire Constitution, still today, is Article 6, a reverence for God and no, reverence for piety. What was the other one?
Piety?
Faith and piety. I forget what
Yeah.
it was. But anyway, Article 6 basically says you need God and family, that structure, to have a sustainable society. The other thing was you couldn't even be a legislator if you weren't a Christian, and if in Massachusetts you had to have accepted Christ as Lord and Savior to be the governor.
Right.
So, and then in early 1800s, John Adams, they're having a Massachusetts State Convention. John Adams comes in, and he gets all this fanfare, and people are, you know, applauding and stuff. So he tried to extend the freedom of religion to the Jewish people, saying that they were honorable people. he lost that vote. So it was clearly, when they talk about freedom of religion, they meant freedom of denomination, not even
Correct.
witchcraft was still illegal up until I think recently. So sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah. So I mean, definitely, again, the Christian foundation. A lot of people don't realize that 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence all identified as Christians. 4 were ministers. A number of the signers were sons of ministers. At least half of them studied divinity at various, colleges back then, Yale and Harvard and this kind of stuff, Dartmouth. And 32 were Episcopalians or Anglicans, 13 Congregationalists, 12 Presbyterians, 2 were Quakers, 2 were Unitarians, and 1 was Roman Catholic. So, and Unitarians back then were not like Unitarians today. Again, this foundation of Christianity. I brought with me this little book. This is the New England Primer. This came out in 1777, and actually, it says that the New England Primer, introduced in Boston in 1690 by Benjamin Harris, was the first textbook printed in America. And it says that the Founding Fathers, as well as millions of other Americans, learned to read from the New England Primer and the Bible. And when you go through this is basically a school book that was used in all the schools in New England and the colonies. And when you go through this, the whole thing is based in Christianity. They learned the alphabet by a rhyme that went with Christian truths. Everything that they were learning in here was backdrop with Christianity. A little prayer for children in the morning, a prayer for children at night. So these kids, our great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers, every morning, every night, learning to pray, learning to cast their dependency on God, who was, whose hand was upon them. And then a great little book, by the way, just to show that, education in America used to be a godly thing, a good thing. And then I think in history, you look at the Great Awakenings, the First Great Awakening with Whitefield and Edwards, the Second Great Awakening, and what a lot of people.
What's the first? What is a Great Awakening?
So a Great Awakening was when spirituality, as far as an intense, intentional, personal commitment to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, began to sweep over people. Because after a while, people get cold, people get stale, they get a crust around them, and religion becomes more of a formality.
Right.
And so revival.
Social club.
Exactly. So an awakening or a revival comes along and shatters that and brings people back into a personal relationship with Christ.
Okay.
And it was out of these great awakenings, because as we're talking about modern day events, and we're talking about systemic racism, and we're talking about the riots in a lot of these cities, it's interesting to know that it was the awakenings and the preachers of the awakenings that were the forerunners of the abolitionist movement. They were the ones that were coming against slavery. So a lot of people don't realize when they talk about, and this is, so they say systemic racism basically says our nation was founded on racism and therefore it's bad and the whole thing needs to get tossed away. Which is preposterous because, I'm a follower of Christ. I'm a minister of the gospel. There's aspects of my life that are not good. There's character flaws that are not good. It doesn't mean that the bad part of me erases or negates all the good things that I do.
Right.
And it's the same with the nation. You can't just say that, because, we had slavery back then or we mistreated the Indians, that the entire nation is useless. No, we've done a lot of really good things over the years as a nation, and that's why every nation on the world envies us, envies our freedoms, and are trying to get in and not out. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, because of a couple of black spots on American history.
I think you could take any individual that is advocating for critical race theory and the 1619 Project, which is part of what you're talking about. If you take any one of those individuals and ask them about their life, if they can't find things that they had done that were evil or wrong, they're lying to you.
Right.
So they're actually, their life is a contradiction of their own statement.
Right. Yeah. And even in the Bible, in 1 John, it says, if we say we have no sin, we make God a liar.
Right.
Because he's saying you do.
Yeah.
So, but these great awakenings, basically kept stoking the fire of Christianity in America and kept America going on a course. The holiness movement of the 1860s, right before the Civil War. The 1900 early Pentecostal revival, which launched the world's greatest missions movement in history, still going today, where the gospel is now just going around the world. So I would challenge any of your listeners that are interested in the Christian history of America to Google a man by the name of David Barton,
Yeah.
and his organization is called Wall Builders. David has the largest library, only second to the Library of Congress of historical documents. So this guy is a historian, and he can argue anyone under the table as far as our religious roots.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to set the scene there of American, solidly being built on the foundation of Christianity. Hands down, it really can't be argued. But then I want to talk about what I consider two of the big shifts that started happening in American culture, that started shifting us away from a 300-year history into where we are now today.
Right.
And the first one is the Scopes Monkey trial. The Scopes Monkey trial happened in 1925. Up to this point, there was a law literally on the books called the Butler Act that forbade any other teaching other than creationalism in schools.
Right.
So all of our schools taught that we were all created by God. And then in 1925, there was a teacher by the name of John Scopes who intentionally violated that act. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that he was put up to doing that by the ACLU,
Right.
the American Civil Liberties Union, which is neither American or civil. But they're the ones that kind of put him up to that, and then it led to that big, what they call the Scopes Monkey trial on the basis of evolution. And the idea back then was that evolution as a theory deserved to at least be presented alongside creationism in public schools. And so that's where it started. So if you undermine in the minds of developing children that you didn't come from God, you're not accountable to God, in fact, there may not even be a God, now you take away from humanity the answer to the three biggest questions that plague a human being, and that is, where did I come from, why am I here, and where am I going?
Right.
The Bible and creation answers all of those, explicitly. Evolution, on the other hand, doesn't answer those,
No,
and so it leaves people adrift.
I will tell you that personally, like I've said on the show before, I was physically very ill since birth, right? So I would go to school, and they would tell me that the only reason I'm here is absolute randomness. A lightning struck primordial ooze, something developed out of that evolved over time, and eventually people started walking on two legs, and that's how I'm here. So basically, I'm not only sick all the time, but I have no purpose, because if I'm here randomly, there is no purpose.
Exactly.
There's zero reason for me to endure being physically ill all the time.
Right.
In fact, it's stupid, because if my only purpose is to reproduce a species, and I certainly shouldn't be one of those people doing that, then my life should have ended when I was 18. It's illogical otherwise.
Right.
So that's what I learned in school.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, from our generation probably till today, we have, a few generations that are wrestling with this concept of, where did I come from, why am I here, where am I going, what's the purpose of life? And I think this starts to set a psychological imbalance in people's lives on the purpose of why we're even here to begin with.
Right.
And that can create a lot of ills for society. If we don't know why we're here, where we're going, that creates a lot of problems.
I don't know if you know it, but a few years ago, John Burt and I introduced legislation just to allow the teaching of the flaws in evolution, because there's huge gaps.
Yeah.
Evolution, if you actually look at it today compared to 150 years ago, really doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Because of the flaws in it. You wouldn't believe the attacks from all around the world.
Right.
Because it so threatens their mindset.
Yeah, it threatens the concept of materialism that basically says there is nothing outside of the known universe.
Right.
The only thing we can understand is materialism. And there is no spiritual dimension.
Right.
And that's why people now refer to the universe as God. I feel the universe is telling me this, or the universe is against me, or they deify the universe.
Right.
Where God, the God of creation, the God of the Bible, is intimately involved in his creation, but he's also transcendent and he's removed from his creation. He doesn't need his creation to be God. But he's sovereign over his creation. So, and we miss the whole spiritual dimension of Satan and angels and demons and what's going on.
That's another angle to this. Okay, so the scientific method is supposed to be that you make a hypothesis, and then you look at all the different possibilities that would or a problem or an issue, and you look at all the different possibilities of what might solve that. The scientists today exclude spiritual variables.
Correct.
Deliberately.
Yeah.
So they don't even apply the same scientific method.
Yeah.
Because they're missing out on one of the key variables that they should be looking into.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into my next point as far as
that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, so we've got we've got the Scopes monkey trial, we've got evolution coming in, evolution now being taught alongside of creation, and then we have this whole misconception of separation of church and state. And I'm sure you know that this derived from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1802 to the Danbury Baptist Association. The Danbury Baptists were concerned that the newly found government may want to form a government church.
Right.
Because the Congregational Church was the largest church in America at that time, and they felt like, they're just going to sanction this and everyone else is going to get steamrolled. And so Thomas Jefferson wrote them a letter saying, no, the government will not infringe or impede the work of the church. There is forever a wall of separation between church and state, meaning that the church does its thing and the state stays out of the business of the church.
Right.
We're not going to create a
Oh, you mean
state-run
like
church.
they can't shut down the church because of COVID-19?
They have no say over the church. Originally, that's what their concept was, and that's what their understanding was. So this letter got misconstrued. And another phrase in the Bill of Rights says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And so they take this with the separation of church and state, saying that in 1962, that the church no longer has any business in the state, which is the exact inversion of what the true meaning was. The true meaning is that the government cannot interfere with the church. And now they've got it saying that the church cannot interfere with the state. And so therefore, take prayer out of the schools, take the commandments out of the schools, take the primers out of the schools, take God out of the schools. We're going to secularize the schools because we cannot have religion overriding the state.
Because the first principle, the reason they had that verbiage in the Constitution was what they didn't want was a denomination pulling the strings for the state. In other words, every other country in the world, at least the European world, was run by either like in England, it was the English church was pulling the strings, or in France, it was the Catholic Church. So they didn't want a church dictating policy and things like that.
Right.
It wasn't that they didn't believe that the people involved in government shouldn't have Christian values and allow those values to color the law and everything else.
Exactly. So, I mean, when you go back to colonial times, when we were talking about New England and a little church in every community, a lot of people don't know, again, because we don't teach American history anymore, we teach politically correct history. A lot of people don't understand that when a politician was elected, before they were sworn in, they were called into church on a Sunday morning. They sat in the front row with their family, and the preacher preached, at that time, sometimes 2-hour messages. I've got a 3-volume book set in my office of Puritan and these early revivalist preachers preaching to politicians to govern righteously, to govern by the dictates of the Bible, to avoid dishonest gain and bribery, and the entire congregation would just sit in, and it was almost like a charge, like we're charging you to exemplify Christian virtues as you fill this office for the service of society. And so here we are now saying that no, the church has no say in the state. And in 1962, the Supreme Court determined it was unconstitutional for school prayer in public schools. So now, you mentioned earlier about creation not even being allowed to be taught. So now, They say creation is a faith-based religious point of view, therefore it's out. So we're no
Right.
longer, 300 years creation only. Scope's monkey trial, creation and evolution. Now with separation of church and state, just evolution. You can't teach creation because that's a religious idea. So in our schools of higher learning, even today, there are many, many, many Christian scientists that believe in creation and have hands down way better knowledge and arguments for creation than others do for evolution. But they can't bring it to the forefront for fear of defunding. The government and the states will defund them. And they'll lose their tenure as professors, and so because of the separation of church and state. So these two things, for 300 years, maybe even longer, of solid Christian foundations, then you get the Scopes monkey trial with evolution, and now the separation of church and state, and now everything begins to unravel.
Right.
You see one of the first things that happen is schools, especially high schools, no longer teaching civics, which was basically the teaching of the Constitution and American history.
Right.
And they replace that now with social studies. So let's look at society and the social issues and, how we poorly treated the Indians, how we poorly treated the slaves. And I'm not saying that those things were right, but now we're focusing on the injustices. And so that led to the absolute, I don't want to say demise of the public school systems, but let me just say that today we are living in a society where public school systems are nothing more than indoctrination centers for liberal thought, period.
Right.
These kids are going in sometimes out of Christian homes, and they're coming out atheists and evolutionists and anarchists and everything else. It's nothing more than an institution of dumbing them down and teaching them. So these are just a couple of statistics from 19.
Well, I think there's another variable in there that you didn't mention. Was because we have drifted away from the Christian values that this country is founded on. By the 1960s, most marriages in the 1960s stayed together, at least for the kids.
Nuclear
Okay?
family. Yep.
Nuclear family. We all know, and statistically, the nuclear family, it's also based on the Word of God, is the most successful way to raise children.
Yeah.
There is nothing that is remotely close.
Yeah.
And yet, in the 1960s, they changed from the biblical understanding of marriage to the 1970s, it's late 60s and early 70s, where they decided that marriage was okay, but if mom or dad wasn't happy, then they should have an easy way to dissolve that union that God sanctioned.
Yep.
And so they ended up with no-fault divorce.
Yep.
So you went from 75, no, more than 75%, I forget what the number was, of children being raised in intact homes in the 60s to, 50% by 1980. And so now you have little kids, they have no mooring because the school is telling them there is no God.
Bingo.
They have no family as backup
Yep.
because families, everybody's out for number one, which is themselves.
Yep.
And, so you basically let these children adrift. Now, if there is no God, people still need God. There's psychologically a part of the human psyche that needs a higher power. So if the only thing left is government.
Yeah.
And government has become God.
Yeah.
And that's why Marxism is... Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing people melt down because, government is their God. And if you rattle that cage, they absolutely lose their cookies. I mean, they just don't know what to do with that.
We've seen people scream.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right. As a minister of the gospel, I perform a lot of marriages, a lot of weddings, and the vows, the traditional vows would, do you promise to be together as long as you both shall live? And now that's replaced with, do you promise to be together as long as you both shall love? And they've done away with the commitment of a lifelong
Have they
commitment.
actually changed it?
Yeah, they're changing it. So a lot of vows now people are choosing to say as long as you... And what does that mean? Does that mean that if a couple wakes up in the morning and she burnt the toast or he burnt the coffee that, hey, screw you, I'm out of here?
Wait. You said burnt coffee, though.
Yeah, well, that is pretty bad.
Seems...
That might be grounds, right?
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's limits.
Oh, boy.
Sorry.
So with the erosion of the schools, so now public schools have been taken over completely by the government. And so you have the academic achievement level has plummeted. We used to be first in all of the nations with SAT scores. Now I think we're down to, 47, 48? I'm not even sure, but we're way below the average. And, one of the reasons is because we're not teaching geometry anymore. We're teaching gender. We're teaching all these crazy
Well, that's kind of like geometry,
political,
really, the way,
57 varieties. I mean,
exactly.
So yeah, you've got you got this crazy stuff going on. You got the increase of out of wedlock births. So teen pregnancy exploded when you take out the fact that God is watching over you and you're accountable and responsible to God. You're not accountable to your parents. You're accountable to God.
Right.
You're not accountable to the police department or to a minister. You're accountable to God. You take that away and, hey, let's hop in bed. Let's have relationships. Hello, I love you. Won't you tell me your name? That rock song.
Yeah.
So that leads to the fatherless generation, which is a huge plight on America. There's no longer men teaching boys to be men, and it's out of control.
In the 1960s, 65, Daniel Patrick Moynihan did a study to find out what was going on with the black communities. And he just discovered that the biggest problem wasn't racism or poverty, it was fatherlessness.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, 25% of the black children were raised in broken homes.
Mm-hmm.
So after they did the war on poverty and the no-fault divorce, by the year 2000 in Washington, D.C., 75% of the children in Washington, D.C. were being raised in broken homes. Only 25% of little boys had dad in the home to slap them upside the head when they were getting out of their mind.
Right.
And when you see the violence on the streets of Chicago, it's not a race thing, it's a family thing.
Yeah. And again, it goes right back to the separation of church and state.
Yep.
Because where did Americans learn about marriage? Through the scriptures, through being at church on Sunday and hearing, Ephesians chapter 5, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Parents, raise your children in the fear of God. We're no longer hearing the biblical role model of marriage. And so people have no yardstick by which to measure marriage. So if you come from a broken home, you figure that, well, if I don't like my marriage, then I'm just going to break it also because that's what's modeled to me. So we start replicating what's modeled to us rather than what's taught to us in a church setting and from the scriptures.
Right.
And everything comes unglued. You have the increase, again, in public schools, you have the increase of illegal drugs and alcohol use, which leads to our modern day opiate epidemic. Where did this come from? Oh, listen, this has been brewing for a long time, right? People are pained to see a murderous abortionist generation. Most people today are survivors of abortion. If you want to look at it that way, we're survivors of the abortion mills. And we don't know why we're here, where we're going, so let's numb ourselves and let's numb it fast. So self-medication.
As I know a good bit about that, and one of the issues is, like we talked about, people don't know God. The first time somebody does drugs, alcohol, it is God. If you're a young kid and you're full of anxiety because of like what we're talking about, the lack of direction and the lack of everything, the first time you do drugs, it is as if all of that stress, all of that anxiety disappears.
Right.
The opiates, the alcohol, they become God.
Yeah. They become, the people say religion is a crutch. Well, isn't almost anything else in life, all of our bondages and addictions and, gambling, whatever. You also had the increase of juvenile crime, and let me just say something about school shootings when we talk about, it's funny. It's funny when a police officer shoots somebody, it's the cop's fault. When a criminal shoots somebody, it's the gun's fault. But when we talk about school shootings, everyone wants to take away the Second Amendment. What they're not looking at is that almost exclusively every school shooting in America, the shooters were on psychological drugs. They were all on psych drugs.
Yep.
Heavily medicated and on
a
psych
large
drugs.
portion of them came from broken homes.
That's right.
There was fatherlessness and drugs.
Yeah. Then you had the deterioration of school behavior. This is hilarious. In 1940, the number one reasons for being expelled from school was chewing gum and talking out of turn. Today, it's rape and carrying weapons to school. So there's
But you
been
can do anything up to that.
yeah.
And you're safe to be in school with my kids.
Yeah, so there's been a big turnaround there. So kids are no longer learning how.
That's actually interesting you said that, because I was talking to my grandson. He's walking into. I dropped him off at school the other day, and he's bringing. He had a pack of gum. I says, "They let you have that?" He goes, "Yeah." Oh, we had to write. I had to, one of my first punishments was writing 500 times, "I will not chew gum in class."
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I was raised in parochial school, and I got
gosh.
caught chewing gum in class. And those nuns, I had a big wad of bubble gum, and they took it and stuck it on the end of my nose, and I had to go through the whole day with a big. Oh, how cruel that is, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
that injured my self-esteem. No, you know what it did? It taught me not to chew gum in school.
No, there'd be a lawsuit nowadays.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you made my son wear gum on the end of his nose?
Right. Well,
Humiliate and degrade him.
Yeah.
And so this comes from the deterioration of parents no longer knowing how to parent. Again, because where are they learning it? They used to learn it in church, on parenting skills and discipline, things like that. Now you're probably old enough, Gary, to remember Dr. Spock. He
Yeah.
came out and said, "Don't you dare lay a hand on a child. You'll warp their self-esteem and you'll destroy their creativeness that's inside of them."
Yeah, I watched Star Trek.
Yeah. So now you
Sharp
had
as a
the
tack.
you had the
Yeah,
baby
thanks.
boomers, and I think we're baby boomers. We're probably the last generation that was dragged to church,
Right.
And now after that, there is no church and there is no teachings of the Christian principles on how God is creator. And the Bible is the hand manual on how life works.
Right.
So when you buy a new car and there's a hand manual on there, this is how the defrost works, this is how this works, because the designers know how it works and they tell you. And that's
Have
what
you
the
actually
Bible
ever
is.
read one of those?
The only one I want to change the oil to, or know what the tire pressure is. But so you had this, you have this decrease and erosion of generation after generation, where now like the millennials are having kids, and these are whatever the XYZs or what they give different different letters to different generations. But the last generation you have is what they call the entitled generation. Like this is the everyone got a trophy for participating generation.
Right.
So they don't know what it means to be scolded or to lose or to be reprimanded. It's no, I want everything, which leads to now a generation that is flirting with the concept of socialism. Because I deserve, what do you mean? Why can't I have health care for free? Why can't I have education for free? Well, because they're not constitutional rights.
Right.
But they want everything for free, and that's why they're flirting with the idea of social, because socialism promises we will give you all this stuff for free. And you don't have to earn.
We got to go back right to the Declaration of Independence on that one, because that's exactly what the mentality is. Everybody wants it,
Right.
and they want it now, and I deserve this. And that's not how we were founded, right? We are entitled to life, we are entitled to liberty, and we are entitled to pursue our own happiness.
Right.
We're not entitled to happiness. We're not entitled to any possessions or anything like that.
Right.
It is up to us to pursue it. It is up to us individually to work for it, to go out there and do the things that get us to where we want to be.
Right.
But that's not what we're seeing in today's millennials.
Right. So, the story of the gospel, that God loved his creation so much that, he took on flesh and came and died in our place to win us over with love, that he loves us, that not only did he create us, but he wants to redeem us, that he conquers evil on our behalf. That's almost like inherent in every person. There's an understanding of that. Even though there's a great level of biblical illiteracy. But if you look at, like even the Wizard of Oz, right? Everybody rejoices when the witches dies because evil is dealt with. So what happens now is when you get into where we are, 2020, in a political climate, if you can vilify or demify the other party and point that they're evil, that there's systemic racism, then there's a younger generation that's going to rise up and fight against that because they're like, yeah, let's ban evil. And so this whole idea of fascism, Nazism, the police are bullies, and all of these things, these are causes worth fighting for. So we're seeing riots and we're seeing chaos and we're seeing groups of people like Antifa that are 100% Marxists and communistic groups that are just trying to push communism into our country and onto our country. And so, the civil unrest, the violence that's happening, I don't know where it's going to end. I hope it ends peacefully. But I do know that the Bible says in Proverbs 14:34 that righteousness exalts a nation. So when we are living for God, we're righteous. It's interesting to know that South America was colonized by countries that were looking for gold. And America was colonized by people who were looking for religious Christian freedoms. This nation flourished and became the greatest nation in history, where South America, for the longest time, was basically third world nations. Now they're developing and becoming better. But it just shows you that, the greed of man does not lead to the blessings of God, where righteousness exalts a nation and sin is a reproach to any people. And we have kicked God out of our schools. We've kicked him out of the public square. We're kicking him out of politics. Is this a good time to be doing that? And I know that people, they want to deify, again, materialism. They want to deify the earth and say that it's ecology and global warming, and therefore the earth is mad, and that's why we're having floods and tornadoes and fires and earthquakes and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I think it's probably God that's mad, that we're turning our backs on a creator and a redeemer who only extends a hand of love to us, and we're spurning that, and we're turning away, and we're saying, I don't want any of that, and we're reaping the results of that. So,
to bring home that point, if you look at these kids that are protesting their alleged injustice, they are so profoundly more wealthy than the people who founded this country, or I shouldn't say the people, but the people at the time of the founding of this country, or even in the 1800s. They're walking. These kids are. This is like a crappy one, but they're walking around with a computer in their hand to organize these things, and it's all because of the sacrifices of our forefathers and that strong religious foundation, which was part of the work ethic.
Right.
If you look at Black Lives Matter, one of the things that they're rebelling against is the privilege of people who have a good work ethic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which it's one of their tenets was that professing or having a work ethic and the idea that hard work advances you in your life.
Right.
Is fundamentally racist.
Right.
Hard work is racist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
I know it's there. I saw it. I read it.
Yeah. And I think when you look at people of color who are legal immigrants that come into this nation, they don't see that at all. I mean, they see this as the land of opportunity. They see that they can come here, they can work hard, they can prosper.
We've had several immigrants over the last few months.
Yeah, we've had
here and
China, Australia, and
Russia.
Was it Russia or Czechoslovakia? Yeah. I forget. But anyway,
Mike Yakubovich.
Yeah, and that's why we had them on, because I don't think people have any clue how great they have it.
Right.
This is the greatest country in the world.
Absolutely, hands down.
It's not even close, and they're protesting, and they want to convert this country to what always fails.
This nation, through the blood of our men and women, have liberated 47 other nations throughout the world in our history, and we have never conquered or taken any of them over.
Right.
And there's no other
asked
country
for any type of repayment.
And as a matter of fact, after we destroyed Europe in World War II, we went and rebuilt Europe at our dime. And now Germany is Germany, and France is France, and Italy is Italy. They're all their own entities. We never absorbed them. We never colonized them.
Never taken.
There's never been a nation in the history of this planet that's ever done that. Like they say, all's fair in love and war. And if you're conquered in war, then you're done. You're ours, and that's the end of it. And so that's just one aspect of American uniquism that we're totally unique. And I'm not saying that we're not without faults. Definitely we've got some blights on our historical record, but America has owned her faults and corrected it. Even right now with racism, like I tell people, as a follower of Jesus Christ, there is no room in my heart, or any heart of somebody who follows Christ, for racism of any kind, be it against black or Jew or Muslim or a woman or a stupid person or a poor person. There's no room for prejudice
Or
or
a
hatred.
rich person.
Or a rich person. Right. All men are we all belong to one family, and that's humanity, the human family. So there's no room for hatred or racism of any kind. I just can't side with people that are pillaging, looting, burning, destroying. I mean, that's not winning an argument. That's basically turning people against whatever movement you say you're fighting for.
Yep.
America owns her faults. We corrected the women's rights. We gave them their rights when we began to realize this is wrong to suppress women, to pay them less. Same with the blacks. We fought a civil war to bring them their freedom, the civil rights.
Like you said, that Civil War was initiated in the North by Christian pastors.
Right.
It
right.
was not
Absolutely
some awakening of some liberal somewhere. It was conservative Christians that.
It certainly wasn't the Democrats, because they're the ones that had the slaves.
Yeah.
And they continued that way. I
Yeah.
mean, the Civil Rights Movement was, and the Civil Rights Act, and the two Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s were both 100% opposed. Not a single Democrat voted for either one.
But even today, I really feel, and I feel good about it, that the nation is willing to take a good hard look at law enforcement practices and say, okay, do we need to make changes? Is there better training we can do? Are there better policies we can institute? To say we're going to defund them and cut them down in numbers is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
And that's the big thing, is no one can find a middle ground, right? There are those of us who are level-minded enough that we can find a middle ground. I absolutely understand some of the complaints against police in general and the training, right? Like you said, are there different things that we can do with the training? Are there different techniques that can be used when apprehending somebody? Right. Those are all perfectly valid questions, because we've grown up in the information age. We watch Cops, we've watched Live PD, right? And we see camera footage, body cam footage, dash cam footage, and we see a number of police officers who've been trained to react a certain way and take down a suspect a particular way. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone can look at all of them and say that every single one of those police officers was 100% correct, right? There is corruption. There is some overbearing and somewhat use of force that isn't correct, that can be dealt with. But like you said, do we go so far as to say defund and get rid of the police, et cetera? And then once that happens, what do you get? You get the autonomous zone, where people were murdered, and police and first responders couldn't get in there.
Raped. In the autonomous, they were being murdered and raped.
Right.
Businesses were being
and
destroyed and taken over.
That was what did she call it? What did the mayor call it? The Summer of Love. That's what she called it. The Summer of Love. Oh, this is just going to be a peace, love.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So
but we have a middle ground.
Yeah.
But then you have these folks out there on the right that don't want a middle ground. There is something going on in this country. There's people, or as Gary would say, a spirit. There is something out there that does not want a middle ground. They want black and white. They want a line drawn, and they want us fighting each other.
This whole thing boils down to the spiritual battle between light and darkness, between Satan and his rebellion against God's kingdom and God's kingdom of light. Now, it's not even a contest, because the Bible says that God sits in the heavens and laughs. I mean, it's not even a contest. Satan is a created being. His time will be done when God says it's done. But this is the conflict that we find ourselves in. And so everything boils down to a spiritual battle. There is a spiritual battle over the soul of this nation right now. Will we push through and pursue God and try to reclaim our relationship with God and the blessings of God? Or will we go on with progressive liberalism and socialism and say we don't need God because man can solve all his own problems, and therefore incur the wrath of God? So, a few years ago, I was on another TV program. This was years ago with the whole same-sex.
Is it better than this one?
Yeah, no, really. This is the best one I've ever been on, Gary. Come on. I want to come back sometime.
Oh,
So
yeah,
of course
yeah,
this is the
yeah,
best.
yeah.
So, but anyways, it was over the civil unions and gay unions, and I was going to Concord and debating on the side of Christianity and biblical values, and so they wanted me on this. There was a panel of people, and so they were talking about this on this TV program while this was still a really heated debate, and they looked at me as being the pastor, and they said, "So, Pastor Ken, do you see this as a religious issue?" And in hindsight, I got thinking about that, and I said, listen, in my mind, I was thinking, if you believe there is a God, overall, there is no issue that is not a religious issue.
Right.
He's over everything. Everything. So politics is a religious issue. Sin is a religious issue. Finance is everything. Marriage, family raising, everything is a religious issue, how we see it. And the sooner that we can line up with the way God sees things and agree with him and side with him, then the sooner we get back to the history of what America was founded on, of Christian principles, wherein we find the blessings of God, and where a lot of these social ills that we see going on in our nation now begin to kind of dry up and blow away. Because it's all about an individual walk with God. I am personally responsible and accountable to God. Not government, not even my parents, not the police, not even to a church. Ken Bosse is personally accountable to God. When I die, no one else is going to be there. It's going to be between me and him, and he will be my judge at that point. The good thing is before he's my judge, I've already made him my savior. So I kind of escape the judgment aspect of that. And I hope your listeners and viewers realize that also, that one day they will stand accountable before a God, and I hope he is their savior rather than their judge.
Well, see, this the way I look at it is pretty simple, because I'm simple, right? Simple-minded.
You're definitely simple.
So every knee will at the end of their life bow before Jesus Christ.
Right.
Every single person that has ever been created will be on bended knee before Jesus Christ at the end.
Either as a believer or as someone who says, uh-oh.
Right.
Yeah, either you did it willingly ahead of time,
Right.
or reluctantly at the end, but every knee will bow.
Correct.
And so if you wait till the end, you waited too long.
Yeah.
Which is sad. And the thing is we get so many children that they're so going through life rudderless. I mean, one of the things you can look at, and I think this kind of, to me, brings it all home, is these people are protesting. They are enraged. They are not. It's not a rational thing. I saw a white 20-ish-year-old woman sitting there flipping off a black officer,
Right.
and screaming at him,
Yeah.
for being racist.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you can't look at that and see the absurdity
Right.
of that, then it's because I believe it's, like you say, it's a spiritual battle that we're in, and it's a spiritual battle for the soul of America.
Right. Yeah.
So that brings us to Wilson Hill Pistol Club. What's going on?
Okay.
No, we only got like a minute.
Yeah, we're almost. Obviously, Wilson Hill Pistol Club will sponsor the show. We have several trainings coming up. We've got the Utah Concealed Carry course. It allows you to carry in, I think, 36 states, as long as you also have a New Hampshire pistol license. That'll be on the 18th. It will be held at Wildlife Sport Outfitters. And, no, I'm sorry, that's the 17th. On the 18th, there's defensive handgun number 2, and there's a few other classes. If you go to wilsonhillpistol.org, you can see our training schedule, sign up there.
There's a meeting tonight.
And there's also a meeting tonight in 5 minutes at 1732 Lakeshore Road. It's our membership meeting, open to the public. You can come and
You can join there.
and join the club and see what it's all
I
about.
think he's got me back. I'll tell you.
Well, you hit me. I'm listening to the pastor here, and I've been very quiet today, and I am enjoying hearing what's going on.
So, Pastor, how can people get in touch with you if they have questions or?
Sure.
Or what
So,
church? And
yep, I am at New Life, Raymond, New Hampshire. You can
that's back east.
you're back east.
Way back east.
You can
Oh,
you
yeah.
can Google New Life Raymond, and you'll come up to our website,
Yeah.
or you can call 895-6041. And we're here to serve people. We will take time to answer your questions and talk to you. You text us, you email us, you call us. We'll take time to talk with you. Absolutely.
And so we're going to say goodnight. If you have hatred in your heart, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely.
We'll see you guys next week.